In the 1993 movie Groundhog Day, Bill Murray's character wakes up every day only to relive the same day. In this case, the day that he keeps reliving is Groundhog Day. What do you think about the idea of a sequel to Groundhog Day entitled Groundhog Day 2, the presidential version? In this sequel, every 4 years, our main character relives the same presidential election in which Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee and Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. Would that be too contrived? Well, unless Trump is hauled off to jail or Biden drops out of the race at the last minute only to be replaced by someone like California Governor Gavin Newsom, then it looks like we're going to see a repeat of 2020. To me, a rematch between Biden and Trump says two things. One, that we are seeing the complete corporate takeover of the executive branch of the U.S. government, and two, that our system for electing presidents in the U.S. is a complete joke. Is it possible to imagine less choice than a contest between Biden and Trump? Have either of these two guys ever had an original thought? When Biden is sitting at his desk in the Oval Office of the White House, how much time do you think he spends thinking about ways to help improve the lives of average Americans? When Trump was in the White House, how much time do you think he spent thinking about ways to help the average American? Can you imagine either of these two guys having stone carvings of their faces added to Mount Rushmore? No, this is not a choice, unless you think that only being able to choose between two spokes puppets for the ruling class constitutes a choice in a country that claims to be a great democracy. Today's Democratic and Republican parties are not the same parties that they were in the past. Is today's Democratic Party the same as the one that had FDR and JFK? Is today's Republican Party the same as the one that had Abraham Lincoln and Dwight Eisenhower? Can you imagine a Republican president today saying what Eisenhower said during his 1961 farewell address? In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. No, of course you cannot imagine a Republican president today saying what Eisenhower said. Nor can you imagine a Democratic president today saying that either. Can you imagine a Democratic president today saying that he wants to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the wind like JFK once proclaimed? And of course we saw what happened to JFK. The only reason there are third-party presidential candidates is to create the illusion of choice. Can you imagine living in a country where when you voted for president, you could only choose between two corporate-controlled candidates? That would not be very democratic, now would it? Fortunately, here in the U.S., we have a lot more candidates to choose from than just two corporate-controlled puppets. For example, in 2024, we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., We have the Green Party's Jill Stein. We have Cornel West. And we have, for the Socialist Party, Claudia de la Cruz, just to name a few. As I said before, here in the United States, we get to choose from so many different diverse candidates when voting for president. Except for there's just one problem. Because our system for electing presidents in the U.S. is so rigged, if a candidate is not a corporate-approved Democrat or a corporate-approved Republican, that candidate has as much chance of becoming the next U.S. president as my hamster Weebles does. Imagine our system for electing presidents in the U.S. was a football game. One team would be comprised of all the third-party presidential candidates. This team would have to play football the normal way. The other team would be comprised of all the corporate-backed Democratic and Republican presidential candidates. This team, however, would be able to use motor vehicles out on the football field. And because of that, they would always win the games. That's how uneven the playing field is when it comes to running for president in the U.S. It's as if one team could use motor vehicles while the other team could not. The system is rigged in numerous ways. Here are 3 of the ways. First, we have the major media, which is comprised of 5 media companies that control 90% of the media that Americans receive. The major media will focus primarily on just the corporate-backed Democratic and Republican candidates while keeping the American people ignorant of third-party candidates. And it's not just third-party candidates that will get ignored by the major media. The major media will also ignore Democratic candidates who are not corporate-backed. For example, in 2016, more Fox News viewers knew who Bernie Sanders was than MSNBC viewers did. The reason for this is that MSNBC deliberately ignored Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign because he was not a corporate-approved candidate. And the only time a third-party candidate will be mentioned by the major media is to trash that candidate, such as Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. They will call him a conspiracy theorist. Secondly, the vast majority of third-party candidates cannot compete monetarily with the corporate-backed candidates. The corporate-backed candidates will outspend the third-party candidates by millions of dollars. The corporate-backed candidates are able to afford to buy commercials on network TV which cost millions of dollars and which third-party candidates cannot afford. And number 3, there are no nationally televised debates for third-party candidates. Imagine there were as many nationally televised debates for third-party candidates as there were for Democrats and Republicans. Imagine how much more of an even playing field we would have if the views of third-party candidates were aired on big networks like ABC, CBS, and NBC. But of course that will not happen. Otherwise, we would have something closer to an even playing field. Every 4 years, our corporate overlords are generous enough to allow us to choose between only 2 corporate-backed candidates who are both pro-military, pro-war, and pro-fossil fuel. And also, our corporate overlords are generous enough to allow us to vote for third-party candidates who have as much chance of becoming the next U.S. president as my hamster Weebles does. So what do you think? Do you agree or do you disagree with my assertion that here in the US we don't actually have a choice when it comes to voting for a president? That a choice between a center-right candidate and a far-right candidate does not constitute a choice in a country that claims to be a democracy. Please let me know in the comments below if a choice only between a racist demagogue and a late-stage dementia patient fits your definition of choice.